Greetings, Nick Bowcott with Sweetwater here, and today we are honoured to be joined by Javier Reyes, and he's not only going to talk about 8 strings and Animals as leaders, but his solo project, Mestiz. So, without further ado, enough of my blabber, over to the man of the moment. Javier, thank you so much for taking the time.
Awesome, thanks for having me.
Now, I really want to discuss your new solo album because it's fascinating in terms of how diverse it is in terms of like the musicality from the Gentle Giant opening right the way through to Media Noches the way it closes, which is a complete contrast in styles, if you will.
Sure.
From something people might call this melodic metal gent all the way down to a beautifully melodic jazz thing where Sade's vocal wouldn't go out of place, if that's not a horrible thing to say.
Yeah.
But the close is beautiful, as is a lot. Well, it's all beautiful, but that's especially lilting. It really captured my ear and attention right off the bat from those first 2 chords. So, but first, I just want to get into you as an 8-string player. How did you get here from where you were? How old were you when you started, and why did you start playing guitar?
I started playing guitar at the age of 6.
Oh, Christ, okay.
I'm 40 now, so a long time.
Right.
I don't really remember not playing guitar. I started. My dad just kind of, I was a kid. At 5, I started piano. He was just like, "Yo, you just have to do music lessons." And I was a child. I didn't really have much leg to argue against.
Gotcha.
Um, But quickly, I would say by the age of 8 or 9, I kind of noticed that I remember being like, okay, well, I get this. The way that the teachers at the little store where I learned it, and the way they behaved with me was like extremely encouraging.
Right.
They were just very excited to teach me, and it wasn't just the one teacher. It'd be the other teachers would also see me play, and they were like, "Oh, that's cool. This kid's learning something," and they would all kind of jump in and show me little bits of their styles. So I would say probably by the age of 10, it was like when the first time that I was like kind of good. My teachers were like encouraging my dad to really like push me also, and getting a good guitar, just steady lessons. I remember going to this. I would go to the little music store early before my lessons just to hang out. It was just one of those first things that I knew that I was like good at.
Right. Yeah.
And that was tradition. On a 6 string, obviously. I mean, there wasn't even 7 strings back then. Probably around the age of like 15 or 16 is when I got introduced to 7 string.
And how did that happen? Was it through an artist, through another player?
It was through the band Dream Theater.
Oh, okay,
Uh,
Mr. Petrucci's fault then.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I remember when the first music video for their second album came out, and John Petrucci's playing a 7 string, and my mind was just blown. I was like, "What is going on?" And at the time, there was a local music store in Wheaton, Maryland, where I was living, and it was a really good store. It still exists. I was friends with all the salesmen there. They would allow me to come in and try out all sorts of different guitars. If something cool came in, they'd be like, "Yo, Javi, you should check this out." So I went in there, and I remember asking one of the salesmen, I was like, "Yo, what's up with this Ibanez 7 string?" And they were like, "Yeah, there's a one model. It was that 7 string Universe. It
Right.
was like the black and neon green. I remember putting a guitar on layaway, and that was my first. You know, it took me probably like several months to pay for it, but then I got it. And then I was like a 7 string player almost exclusively at that point. Over my late teens, I started acquiring more 7 strings, and I just stayed a 7 string player as far as electric is concerned.
Right. Now, how hard did you find it to transition from 6 to 7?
I didn't find it that difficult. Most of my guitar playing was on a nylon.
Oh, okay, so it's
Um,
more classical.
yeah, well, yes and no. It was like more like Latin folkloric
Oh,
stuff that I
okay.
was learning. I didn't really do the school of classical guitar. Like I don't know the Bach suites and Carcasses and stuff like that.
Right.
But I was doing like Afro-Cuban music all on on a nylon string guitar. So I was used to the width, of I was just used to that wider neck sort of thing. So when I transitioned to a seven string, it didn't feel that different.
Right.
If anything, it was just like, okay, well, the string spacing is a little bit more narrow than a nylon string.
Yeah, that actually
Um,
makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. That would make the
so
graduation easy.
it was fairly easy.
Did it make you look at the neck differently? I mean, how do you look at the neck? Do you think in terms of patterns or notes or scales? How do you see it? Is it the bunch of dots or is it more intricate than that?
You know what? I think because of classical, everything is all like pattern based. You learn sequences.
Right.
I wasn't doing at the time. I wasn't really learning scales, and I wasn't learning like how to build chords. I was just learning how to play a song.
Gotcha.
Um, and so that was my approach to the seven string. It was just like, okay, well, now I have this extra string. I also, for the longest time, have made this analogy. It's like, well, when a drummer gets a new china, or an additional hi hat or an extra tom, it's not really changing the whole instrument. There's just some more options.
Right. That
Um,
makes sense.
so I've always viewed a seven string and then eventually the eight string the same way. It was like it's still a guitar,
Gotcha.
so play it like a guitar, and the additional strings have always been just like an optional sort of thing.
Gotcha.
It's obviously I did have my phase where like everything I started writing was starting on the seventh or the eighth string, but my approach has always still been it's a guitar first, and approach it that way.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, I mean that's kind of been my philosophy on it.
Now, talking of your philosophy, so when you went from six, you were seeing patterns. Did you still see a six string pattern on a seven and then just add an extra pattern on the seventh string, or did you just change everything so it became a
Um,
solid
I
blob?
I still do when I switched to seven string, and even currently with the eight string, I still keep when I think of theory, when I think of my scales or patterns or anything like that, I tend to keep it six string based.
Gotcha.
Um, and through octaves or just by being familiar with the instrument now, I now, know what I know through theory and apply that to the lower strings.
Makes
Um,
sense.
Again, I think it's combined a little bit with this classical guitar mentality where like I'm learning sequences as opposed to writing a whole section based off of a particular key or anything like that.
Gotcha.
Um,
Gotcha. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Now, talking of your style, and one thing I've noticed from watching the videos, which are fascinating, is did you ever use a pick? Do you ever use a pick? Because you're very
I
finger
do
style.
use a pick often, but more so in animals as
Yeah.
leaders than I do with Mestis, just because it requires heavy picking, sweep picking. Um, there's a more variety of techniques that we use in animals as leaders than I do in Mestis.
Right.
But I'm obviously extremely comfortable with using my fingers.
Right. Extremely,
If
I'd say.
anything, I feel like it's my stronger side of playing.
Right. Yeah, because you were able to like when I was watching some videos of the solo stuff and it was clear you weren't using a pick. There were points where you thought you might have been just because of the amount of percussive attack you were getting. Is that just from years of practicing honing your skill with your fingers?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the one of the benefits that I've gotten from playing on a nylon. You really learn how to work finger tone.
Right.
You know, you don't have effects, you don't have amps or anything delay to enhance the sound. Um, you rely solely on your hands to kind of portray the the emotions or the message that you're trying to get across. um so yeah, I mean, I think to me, I've learned to pay attention to those types of details, dynamics,
Right.
and knowing that comes from the hand, not so much like a volume pedal. Again, I feel more comfortable. I learned to get a variety of sounds just through using my hands and my fingers as opposed to relying on effects.
Gotcha. Now, and how quickly can you make the transition from, saying something like playing something like Media Noche, which is all fingers, to playing something as in an Animals as Leader song where sweeping and a pick is required? Is that
Uh,
an instant
I,
transition?
yeah, at this point, I would say so. In Animals as Leaders alone, we have all the techniques are being used.
Right.
In a single song, we might have something from thumping to tapping to sweep picking, and I think I just got, but been put through the boot camp of guitar techniques
Right.
um, in a single song or a single set list. And with as many shows as we have done, yeah, I think switching styles, um, I think that mentality has kind of just gone out the window, and that's just how we play, you know.
Gotcha. Now, when it comes from doing the transition within a song, how do you palm the pick, if that makes sense? If you're going from picking to fingerstyle,
I'm a pick and mouth type of guy.
I've seen you do that. I was
Uh,
going to ask if you had one of those secret other devices when it was real
no,
quick.
I wish there's a I have a buddy guitar player, Andre Nieri, who has this amazing trick where it's almost like a magical card trick
Yeah,
where he puts it underneath his pinky. Um, I can't do that, so I'm quick to
yeah, just the
just put it in my mouth, figure it out how to position it back to so that I can grab it again.
right, 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 right.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about developing the magical sleight of hand trick, or are you
I've
happy
I've
with?
tried. I've tried. It's a lot harder. It would take some serious practicing to get that.
Right, right, gotcha. Now, what came first? Pick? I'm imagining because you started on nylon, it was fingers first, right?
Fingers first for sure. Yeah. So the very first teacher that I had was a flamenco player, and I studied with him for maybe about just a year,
Right,
and then quickly I moved on to this other guy. His name was Stuart Payne, and amazing teacher. But we were doing primarily like rock music. So I was doing a lot of like Beatles tunes. Um, yeah, I would say my first year to 2 years with him, I was learning everything from the bubblegum era of the Beatles all the way to like, the later end, um, while my guitar gently weeps type of
gotcha.
style. But at that point, I still didn't have an electric guitar. It was all on a nylon string. And Stuart was great with teaching me how to play these tunes with my fingers. I mean, we played everything from Yesterday to While My Guitar Gently Weeps to, Paperback Writer.
Right.
Um, so it was quite a. I mean, it's kind of amazing, but the Beatles music is great for learning guitar, in my opinion. They, on the elementary level of guitar techniques, they kind of cover it all.
Now, on the rare occasions the Beatles bent notes, were you substituting a slide, or did you just have incredible hand strength and you could bend a nylon?
Um, by the time we started getting into slides, it was, man, it's so long. I probably had my first electric at that point,
Gotcha.
but yeah, we probably did slides and stuff like that to substitute. But I remember learning all my hammer-ons and pull-offs and slides and stuff like that, all on a nylon. You
Gotcha.
know,
There are certain 7 and 8 string players out there who use the lower strings to great effect, but rarely use the entire sonic expanse of the instrument. You're definitely using all 8 strings and the whole sonic tapestry from low to high. Was that just a natural thing from the get-go? Like, I mean, there are certain 7 and 8 string players who could really have a 4 string guitar and play what they play, but you're using all 8.
ironically, when I got introduced to the eight string, it was for the purpose of animals as leaders.
Right,
Um, I was a seven-string player and really primarily doing six-string stuff at that time. Um, I was playing in a tango duo with my then teacher, and I was producing hip hop, nothing to do with
oh wow,
anything metal.
right,
If anything, I had like told myself I would never want to join a metal band again. Um, but Animals as Leaders started. All of a sudden, we're in this the band started doing better than we were expecting, and all of a sudden I'm this 8 string player, in this prog world, and I'm in a metal band again. Although I grew up playing metal, I'd also stopped listening to it for a while, and I was doing a lot of finger picking stuff. I mean, like I said, I was in a tango duo, so my forte at the time, and still is finger picking. So once it was time to start writing stuff, it was kind of difficult for me to just be like, all right, let me just write some chug riffs.
Right.
Um, what the stronger riffs or the stronger things that I were writing were all still finger picking stuff. So for me, it was a pretty natural decision to still continue to compose in a finger style manner.
Right.
And then with using, the additional strings, going back to what I was saying earlier, I feel like, okay, sure, I have two additional strings from the normal guitar. I feel like it's more effective if I continue to write in the 6 string range, and then from time to time add the additional strings to create depth.
Right. Right.
If I'm thinking of a piano player, it's rare to see a piano player start in his lower register. They're generally starting somewhere in the middle of the piano, and they kind of either move up and move down to create, dynamics, to create, highs and lows of a song. And I try to do the same thing with a guitar. I find it way more difficult to make a song interesting when you can only ascend in your note registers, as opposed to having the ability to go up in notes and the ability to go down as well.
That's a great analogy and also approach, really, because like you say, if you start there, the only place you can go is higher. You can't go lower. So you've limited your scope or your range, pun intended.
Exactly. And obviously there's bands that, their whole agenda is to stay within the 2 lower strings, or maybe the 3 lower strings, and they're fine with that. And that's the sound. But,
Right.
again, for me, what is most comfortable is coming up with chords that have a variety. Also, with how I come up with my chords, it's generally around 2 to 3, maybe 4 notes tops in a
Right.
single chord. And I like using, a combination of high notes with low notes to create some sense of movement.
No, it definitely does. It's almost like you're a bass player by default, which you are in. Like the fact you don't have a bass player in Animals as Leaders speaks volumes
Yeah,
as to the importance of those low strings,
for
and
sure.
and the juxtaposition of the highs versus the lows. But yeah, some of the chords you play on the solo record are mind-blowingly cool because you do have that lowness as well as a highness. It almost sounds like two separate instruments.
Yeah, yeah. We've definitely had people try to transcribe some of our Animals as Leaders stuff, and even the MSD stuff, and they wrote a single part into 2 parts.
Right, which is understandable, I guess. These strings, but never
Yeah,
both
exactly.
together. Gotcha, gotcha.
They couldn't possibly play together. No way.
But that's just how you think or you hear.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Now, how would you describe the difference in technique and style yourself versus Tosin?
Well, Tosin's, we've known each other for a long time, and he is one that loves to go fast.
Yeah,
He is one who is constantly trying to innovate the guitar, and he's done so, in a lot of ways, and with the thumping, selective picking. I mean, some of his sweeping is kind of, top notch, and he is always just kind of trying to push 11, where I myself, I'm on the mentality of, less is more,
right.
and he's on that Ingve more is more mentality.
I knew his name would
so
come up. Yeah,
so it's a good balance. Well, we've both complemented each other's playing for a long time. I introduced 7 string to him and finger picking style stuff to him.
right,
He's introduced a bunch thumping to me. I play 8 string because of him and Animals as Leaders.
right.
So we've definitely learned a lot from each other over the years. You know, I I rely a lot more on my chordal playing and my finger touch as opposed to just playing fast,
Right.
playing loud sort of thing. So there's quite a variety. I mean, it's funny, even when we're like comparing each other's guitars or comparing each other's pickups, there'll be instances where like I sound better on my pickups than on his pickups and vice versa. Just because our styles are so different. I mean, everything from finger touch to how we pick to how we write.
Right. So that was one thing I was going to ask to say is that in terms, you don't just only complement each other stylistically, but tonally, there's a really nice palette. It's very wide, even though it's only allegedly 2 guitars, when it could be 4.
Right.
According to some transcribers, it's probably 4 guitars, but if we stick to the fact it's really only 2, I mean, how different is your setup to his? Like, I know you have the Fluence pickups, you have the ESPs.
Yeah, we both have Fluence pickups. The voicings of them are very different.
Oh, very.
His are extremely hot. I always say that it's kind of like having already like some type of boost in front of your guitar already.
Right.
And they sound great for when he plays them. I have a set of his pickups and I prefer mine over his. I go for more of a natural, like a more traditional passive.
Right, more passive than active.
Sound, again, that finger finger tone is pretty important to me, and I always felt like passive pickups really translated that. So when I got the ability to do the Fluence, that was my biggest like goal. I was like, this has to feel natural. This has to like behave the way that a passive pickups does. I like for there to be dynamic range in the pickup, where as I feel with Tosin's, there's slightly less dynamic range.
Right. No, yours are very, very touch sensitive indeed. Like you said, typical passive as opposed to active. And there's a point where it gets squashed to the point you lose a little bit of that.
Correct. But again, for his style, I think it's great. It's like he's eliminating some of the pedals and processes that he would have to do in compression that he would have to do beforehand, and just putting it in the pickup,
Gotcha.
which I think is great.
And now, when it comes to amps, like you're both in the digital and the analog domain, aren't you? Because I know you use the Fractal, but you also use Synergy. How does that synergy work? Awful pun not intended.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we're always on this like quest for that next best thing,
right?
And over the years, you have this effect of, it's like listening to your old album and you're like, it's no longer as cool as it was, right?
Right.
And so we're always just on that quest. I mean, for me, I've been exploring with the Synergy, and I enjoy it. I still love my Axe effects. I think the functions of them are quite different.
Right.
If I want to play through an amp and really have the amp feel, the Synergy is kind of the way to go. I mean, I think as advanced as something like the Axe effects or the Kemper have been and have gotten over the years, I think there's something to be said with the directedness that happens between, guitar, cable, amp,
gotcha.
with hardwired components that I don't think, I think it's just really hard to mimic,
Yeah, they're getting closer and closer, though. But yeah,
they're getting closer and closer. But in some ways, amps are just amps. It's like,
now, is it a sonic? Is it a feel thing as well as a sonic thing with you? I would imagine it is.
I would say with the amp, there's less work to be done, which in some ways is great, right?
Right.
You don't have that option paralysis that something like the Axe effects can give you.
That's a great term, by the way.
Thank you. I think the Axe effects is as capable, or the Kemper as capable as giving you the tones that a real amp can give you.
Right.
It just may take a more particular ear to be able to know what you're looking for. I've definitely had my experiences with the Axe effects, and sometimes I get great tones, sometimes I don't. There's always, because I'm always messing around, seeing what this knob does and what this knob does. and we'll have, what is this tube, and start Googling what those tubes do, and look up what real amps have. And so I'll spend hours and weeks, and have the Wikipedia open, and trying to figure out how to come up with the best tone. Then all of a sudden I'll hook up to the Synergy, Morgan's, little module, and it's like, oh, that's the thing, you know. and
I
and
gotcha.
there's only like 6 knobs on it. There is no changing the tubes and changing the power section, and that's all the stuff that is obviously the benefit of something on the digital side,
Right.
but it is nice to have that
That
the
less
e
is the less is more again. It's that cycle, isn't it?
exactly. So again, I'm a fan of both of them. I think they have a place. One, I think it depends on the type of player that you are.
Right.
That it's particularly important. Or what is more important? Function, feel, sound, all those types of characteristics are extremely important when picking out what type of gear you want. I for feel, I think a real amp might still be the top. You know, but I think as options and functionality, something like the XFX, I think it's still um, incredible. And it might be hard to beat. The Kemper
Gotcha.
as well, Helix as well. They're all extremely functional.
Gotcha.
Um,
Now, so when it comes to recording versus playing live, do you have a preference? Are you amps recording, maybe live sometimes?
for recording, I like it all. I have this rack over here behind me, and I literally have my Synergy rack, my Axe Effects, my Kemper. You know,
Oh, good grief. Yeah.
yeah. So you know, uh, I like to explore. I have my go-tos, whether it's a preset or one of the modules or anything like that. But I like exploring. It's honestly, it's been hard once a mix is said and done. It might be a little hard to tell which is which.
Gotcha.
Um, as far as performing live in my function, like for functionality purposes, the Axe Effects has been the most effective for me.
Got,
I'm in a single set list with Animals as Leaders, I may go through some 21 patches with different gain stages, volumes in those different gain stages that with a real amp might just be a little bit more difficult for me to accomplish.
yeah, unless you
Um,
had 20 setups. Yeah.
exactly. So the Axe Effects has definitely been a little bit more practical for me.
Gotcha. Now, when it comes to the recording process that you just mentioned, the fact you've got Axe Effects, Kemper, and your modules, the Synergy modules, how often do you layer those for a texture? Do you find yourself mixing and matching a lot?
Not a whole lot, but I do like to. I've really been enjoying the Morgan uh, module from the Synergy.
Right.
Um, there's just a quality that I'm getting in kind of this like real, almost in-person presence that sometimes it's hard to achieve with the Axe Effects. Again, it's possible. It just takes a little bit more finagling.
Now, when you're recording at home, are you miking up a cabinet or are you DIing or a mixture?
All my stuff is all DI.
Right.
I'm in my apartment right now, and I mean, it's a bedroom.
Right.
I have neighbors upstairs, so to run a cab here, it would be
Probably.
a good reason to start getting complaints.
Yeah.
So
Maybe
I run
evicted.
everything. I run everything DI.
Gotcha.
We've did some shootouts. A couple years when we were doing the last Animals as Leaders album, we were at this awesome studio here in Burbank, and we had 2 extra days that we already had paid for, and the engineer was like, yo, why don't we do some guitar tracking? And he was like, I'll prove to you that this is better than the Axe Effects, that
Ah.
the digital world. And the studio is amazing. He's an amazing engineer, and he has all the sweet toys,
Right.
everything boutique, everything, Wizard amps, the Diesels, the Friedmans, the Camerons, everything that we love. And we were like, okay, what's gonna hurt? Let's go do it. Um, and what I learned that was, okay, we're in this, $1 million studio. The amp is all in one room, cranked up as,
Right.
as you should crank up the amp. And, in the room, it feels incredible. You're like, yeah, there's impossible to replace this. How can you do that? But then we go into the control room where we start tracking, and the little latency that is created by just however many feet of cable, uh, from one control room that goes into the board that goes finally into Pro Tools, it's almost the same as any latency that one could feel from like a Kemper or um, an Axe Effects. So to me, I was just like, well, it's not worth the several thousands of dollars of studio time to go in there and do that, where I'm actually getting the same result at home with a digital format.
Interesting. Now, when
You
when it
know,
comes to recording your, sorry, I've never heard that. So that's like the latency from cable length is an interesting one that people often discard or don't take into account, but it is real.
it definitely is real. Especially in a studio when I mean, there's who God knows how many feet there is. I mean, everything's all perfectly laid out with panels, but you know the studio, the room where the actual cab was, to where the control, the Neve console is, um, there's probably a good 50 to 100 feet of cabling,
Yep.
and that can absolutely, and then never mind whatever panels they're hooked up to. And again, that's just to the console, and then it has to go into an interface, and then back out to the monitors. Um, there's absolutely latency. It's almost impossible for there wouldn't be. And they're obviously, it's all high end gear, so the latency is as minimal as possible, but it'll be there. And I don't think it can there, at least not yet. It can't keep up with how fast that amp cable guitar relationship is. I mean, that is as direct as can be. And especially if you're in the room with the amp.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah. It's
once
immediate and very
it's
tactile.
immediate, the way that the speakers, the guitar cab speakers resonate versus how studio monitors resonate, worlds apart,
Nope, you're
you
right. You're
know.
absolutely right. I've been in studios where the soundproofing hasn't been that good, and you can sometimes hear that latency because you can hear what the cabinet's doing. Then you hear it through the. I mean, you're talking milliseconds, but it's there.
It's there, absolutely. Yeah.
It's
And
almost
when you're playing something complicated as a sweep picking or some crazy tapping stuff, those milliseconds really do add up.
yes,
So
and that's my excuse, and I'm sticking with it. It's all latency.
me too.
Now, when it comes to DI, so you're using your Synergy stuff. What is your signal path for DI at home then?
So I have a Focusrite ISA 428
Right,
MK2. Um, so normally when I'm going to be doing tracking, I always like to track DI guitars as well.
right.
So I actually go hook up the guitar into the Focusrite, and then go from the Focusrite to the Synergy,
Gotcha.
right? That way I can get both the Synergy cab sim, sound,
Right.
and I get my DI in case I need to reamp, or in case I want to use some plugin or anything
Gotcha.
additionally, but then from that, back into my Focusrite, to two separate channels to get a little bit of warmth, and then into my Apollo, which is the interface that I use here.
Cool. 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 Now, how often do you reamp?
Quite a bit, actually, especially with the Mystique and the last Animals as Leaders album. I mean, there'd be times where we're like, yeah, this amp tone is great. It works great. And then we record real drums, and then all of a sudden the that amp tone isn't quite working as
Gotcha. Yeah. I've,
as well as we thought it would be, you know. So or maybe this one amp tone is too different from a previous song, and then we start trying to glue it a little bit together. So quite often, actually. Same thing with leads. This lead tone may sound great over the whole stereo mix, but then once we bring it in uh, into a session when we're kind of mixing everything in, all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, we put too much delay. We we burn the delay into the track,
Gotcha,
and
gotcha,
then I'll
gotcha.
want to reamp everything and then have the delays on a separate track
With
or
you
a
now.
separate bus.
When you DI sometimes, do you actually go back in the same amp with some slightly different settings or a completely different amp altogether?
A variety
Gotcha.
of it depends. Sometimes the same amp, and sometimes just a completely different one.
Yeah, it's nice to have that option though after the fact, especially if you get a great performance. There's nothing more
Yeah, I
frustrating.
mean, absolutely. Sometimes, Tosin has a signature plugin with Neural DSP. And sometimes we'll just, it's kind of nice to just open that up also on the DI and see if that's a quick solution. There, you don't need to, use any cables again. And so I personally like having just the options there. So, but yeah, pretty often, I would say.
Now, going back to your solo live album, 9 tracks, very diverse, each one recorded in a different city. Was that intentional? Because it's, Chicago to Canada, Philly to LA. What was the reasoning
Um,
behind each one? There's no two from the same city.
yeah. So normally we would just record the entire set from
Right.
every show. So that was taken. All those recordings were taken from the tour that I did last year in the U.S. with as support for Pliny, and yeah, we just had this set up to record everything, and we kind of just took the best performances from each show, and or a variety of them, and then came up with a set list that made a little bit more sense.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. So it was pure coincidence that it was one from each city, as opposed to, oh, I haven't represented Colorado. I better do a Denver track.
yeah, totally. It was just more so. This is the one that came out better. This is the one that came out better. This is the one that came out better. You know.
Now, I must say, like with the pandemic going on, everyone's doing live streaming. Corey Taylor just did a really great one. Ahmed Saint just did a really good one. Of course, great one actually, and of course, Animals did one as well. But there's something about your live album actually hearing that applause, which kind of from my personal standpoint gives the listener kind of a bit of an adrenaline jolt because this is happening live, whereas the live stream there's that weird silence in between the songs.
Yeah, it's weird that we're getting accustomed to this live stream mentality, and we're forgetting about shows. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it was great to be able to do it live. So with Mistis, it is a side project, and actually, I don't get to tour it as often as I would like, for a variety of reasons. Guarantees, just
Right.
touring with animals. Not necessarily trying to go tour in a van either. So it just to do the Plenty tour was actually in a lot of ways it worked out great. Part of the cool stuff with the crowd noise in there is people really being stoked to be able to hear the Mystique material live, because I mean I think the first album came out in 2012, or the first EP,
Right.
and this was the first US tour that I just did in 2019. um, so I think it was just I think for the audience and for myself it was a cool opportunity to kind of play material that's existing in the world but that is kind of extremely rare to see live.
What's next on your agenda, like musically? Because you're incredibly diverse, as a solo artist and also within Animals of Leaders. As leaders, where do you see yourselves going, or don't you know yet? Is it just where the emotion
I
takes
mean,
you?
I think, I mean, we're currently working on new Animals as Leaders material, and I'm currently also working on Misty stuff, kind of like on the side. Due to the pandemic, we're obviously taking a little bit more time than anticipated, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Whenever you release a first album, you have years of material
Right.
to put that music out, and then all of a sudden every 2 years you need to like outdo yourself, and then just those 2 years. Um, we've actually waited a long time to release any new Animals as Leaders out material for that very reason, where it's just like we didn't want to do like a rehash of anything that we've done in the past. um, we like to give ourselves time to find new influences, find new inspirations, um, to to create, to see how that can your style can develop. And that is the same for Mestis and for Animals as Leaders. I think the three of us in Animals as Leaders, well, you know, we all kind of have that same mentality where it's like constantly searching for new inspirations, constantly searching for new little things that we can borrow and apply to our music. There's always going to be an element of we're still going to be doing Animals as Leaders. I'm still going to be writing Misty stuff, but there, you know, part of the fun of writing new material is exploring the new avenues of what you can add to it. You know, how do you write the same but more of it, and a new creative approach to it as well, to create it, you know, to create something more extra than when you have in the past.
Gotcha. Now, when it comes to finding those new avenues of influence and inspiration, excitement, do you purposely go out and go, okay, I'm just going to open my ears and mind to everything? Do you have certain paths you take, or you just go, let's see what's out there? And
I think a little bit of both. You know, I personally like a variety of music.
right,
And I that goes the same for both Tosin and Matt from Animals. And I think that's part of the reason why Animals sounds the way it does. As well as Mestis, we apply all our interests in music and apply that into metal. We've learned to filter it into somewhat of a genre, as opposed to listening to only prog bands or only
right,
metal bands, or only guitar music. I think if that were the case, Animals would sound a lot more, you know, like Dream Theater, like, only Meshuggah or something like that. I think the fact that we listen, I listen to everything from jazz to pop to, trap music to classical music to weird experimental music. And if I can find anything within those genres that I like, and then I can figure out how to apply it to my thing, then that's an achievement for me.
so it's have open ears and an open mind and be an artful thief. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, so much has been done. It's hard to be original. It's extremely hard to be original. And in some ways, it's harder to convince people of your originality. It can go both ways. It's like you either come up with the most original music and people hate it,
Yeah,
or people really love it.
right,
There's no like in between. And then there's a lot of people who are just okay with sounding like everybody else.
right.
I'm a fan of originality, and the music that I tend to listen to is that as well. I don't like every metal band. I don't like every jazz artist. I don't like every hip hop artist. I look for those that
Right, that
have
move
a
you.
sense of originality where I can borrow from. So I then take that and figure out how to, apply it. Also another thing with like how to be a creative, or you know somewhat of a riff thief sort of thing, is the context. If I like something in electronic music, when I apply that to guitar, it could almost be a slight direct ripoff, but because I'm putting it in guitar and there's like, fusion drumming of it on it, the context is so different that
Right, right. That's a
it
good point.
removes the idea of ripping off.
Yeah,
you
it
know
takes it so far away from where it started that it becomes something new
yeah,
by
ripping off
default.
turns into influenced.
Yeah, no, yeah, like I said, Artful Thief. Remember years ago, I had the pleasure of working with Kirk Hammett on his Guitar World column, and one of the most interesting ones he did was one called "Listened Without Prejudice," which cocked a lot of people's ears up because they thought, wait, he's talking about George Michael, and in a weird way, he was. He was saying, listen to everything, not just guitar. Listen to Coltrane.
Right.
Listen to the great jazz players. Listen to everybody and anybody, and make it yours.
Yeah. There's a song from the live album called Mestizo.
Right.
And it has this very like pocket drum beat, and this very Latin-esque, almost Afro-Cuban, almost like flamenco type of guitar. To me, I was ripping off Al Di Meola. You know,
Yeah.
that he's got this album, Diabolic Inventions or something.
Yeah. I know the one you mean.
Um, and it's just him with a cajon player, and the entire album is kind of this vibe where the cajon player is just playing these pocket little grooves. I was like, okay, I love this style. I'm gonna make a mestizo in this thing. I was like, all right, well, the context is going to be different. I'm playing an 8-string guitar. I'm adding some distortion. There's going to be some Rhodes, crazy heavy hitting drums. But I think the tempo is exactly the same. You know, a bit of the feel is kind of there. I'm the only one who's ever been like, yo, I'm ripping off Al Di Meola. No one's ever come to me and told me, yo, you ripped off Al Di Meola,
Gotcha.
you know? So to me, that's like borrowing in a
successfully.
Borrowing successfully, you know, because I mean, so many ideas have been done that to be absolutely original is nearly impossible.
The scary truth is there's only 12 notes and we all have them. So do with them what you will. Last question, my friends. This has been fascinating. Thank you so much. What would your advice be to someone who sees what you're doing and would like to follow in your footsteps, or at least part of the way? What would your wisdom be to someone who's just starting out to sort of make a career in music such as you has?
Focus on learning how to create your own voice. Having my own voice in music has been extremely important. There are other guitar players that are faster than me, that, you know, can tap all the notes and all the stuff, but I'm pretty sure that I have a sound, you know, and I think that takes merit over like just being the fastest guy in the world.
Right.
You know, Tosin has a sound.
Yeah.
You know,
definitely.
there is a sense of originality. You know, all the guitar players of the world that we love and know, they have all figured out their niche, their little thing. And if you can focus on that and write music for yourself, not just to like please a scene, please a trend, then I think you might have a better chance at being a long-term successful musician than maybe just someone who can play really well and can fit in.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you. One other thing I just wanted to point out, which is a weird thing, is I've heard people go, I'd like to play 8-string, but my hands aren't very big. You don't have Larry Mitchell or Billy Sheehan style length hands.
My hands are pretty standard in size.
Yeah, they are.
I've seen some small hand players who can do crazy stretches. I think whether if you have too big of a hands, you're probably fine. I've seen some guys, massive hands, who are playing these little, you know, strats and
killing it.
And I've seen the vice versa. There's also like female guitar players out there now who are like monsters on the guitar, and I'm sure they're not like, oh, my hand's not big enough.
Right.
You know, so for anybody who says that their hands aren't big enough for an 8-string, just give it like 2 weeks and you realize that you're probably like fine.
Unfortunately, for a lot of people, that's probably 13 days too long. But but joking aside, thank you so much for taking the time, my friend. I really enjoyed the solo album. I look forward to whatever you guys come up with next, not only by yourself but also with Tosin, because fascinating stuff. Thank you for being yourself, which is a weird way to finish, but it's awesome. The truth. Take care, my friend.
Awesome.